Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Good morning and welcome to this week's Climate and Coordination RCAST. We have lots of different, very interesting and important topics about climate and coordination that we think you'll enjoy. And this week is no exception. And I stumbled on two stories about fungi, about mushrooms that are both in The Guardian, but they have slightly different perspectives. And I don't know if it's a coincidence or maybe there's a sort of shift, talking about that. But Greg has brought up the importance of mushrooms in the environment and fungi, I guess. I'm not sure if mushrooms is the term for all fungi. Anyway.
Mycelia, maybe?
Sorry?
Mycelia, maybe?
Oh, mycelia. Yeah, sure.
I don't think it's coincidence. I think that it's a conspiracy of mycelia. That
would be a good band name, Mycelia Conspiracy. So the first subject here is from The Guardian, and I just wanted to share a little bit about this because actually I didn't know that much about this, but I think people are starting to, as people start to dig deeper into really how we can decarbonize and how we can preserve as much healthy, vibrant life on Earth, I think people are starting to realize just how complex and intelligent these systems really are. And it goes a lot deeper than just saying, okay, let's save the trees. Because the trees, they're a very important part of the environment, but they're just sort of one component. And I think it's really fascinating now that we're starting to gain a deeper respect for the intelligence that's been amassed by these organisms over millions of years. So the headline says, world's vast networks of underground fungi to be mapped for the first time. Project aims to protect some of trillions of miles of the, quote, circulatory system of the planet. I'll just read a little bit here. Vast networks of underground fungi, the circulatory system of the planet, are to be mapped for the first time in an attempt to protect them from damage and improve their ability to absorb and store carbon dioxide. Fungi use carbon to build networks in the soil, which connect to plant roots and act as nutrient highways, exchanging carbon from plant roots for nutrients. For instance, some fungi are known to supply 80% of phosphorus to their host plants. Many hotspots of mycorrhizal, I don't know if I'm saying that right, fungi are thought to be under threat from the expansion of agriculture, urbanization, pollution, water scarcity, and changes to the climate. The new project from Society for the Protection of Underground Networks, SPUN or SPUN, will involve the collection of 10,000 samples around the world from hotspots that are being identified through artificial intelligence technology. Jane Goodall, the conservationist who is advising the project, said, an understanding of underground fungal networks is essential to our efforts to protect the soil on which life depends before it is too late. That's a pretty strong statement in support of this project. And there's a bunch of other quotes about what they're doing and so on and so forth. Apparently, I'll just say 10 hotspots have been identified by the scientists involved, including Canadian tundra, the Mexican plateau, high altitudes in South America, Morocco, the Western Sahara, Israel's Negev Desert, the steppes of Kazakhstan, the grasslands and high plains of Tibet, and the Russian taiga. So pretty diverse samplings there. It says here that this is, I think, being funded by Jeremy Grantham, who's a billionaire. He put in 3.5 million and just said, just below our feet lies an invaluable ally in mitigating climate change, vast hidden fungal networks, billions of tons of carbon flow annually from plants to fungal networks. Yet these carbon sinks are poorly understood, and working to map and harness this threatened but vital resource for life on Earth, Spun is pioneering a new chapter in global conservation. So I guess, yeah, he's sort of protecting it because we can use those systems for carbon capture, which seems a little bit leechy, but valuable. I think we should just protect them for the sake of protecting them. But yes, also for carbon capture. There's one more story that's related to this, but I'll pause for comment.
Well, we should get that shit on the blockchain. We should contact Spun.
Yeah, you mean to store their data, to store the findings? Fascinating.
That's interesting. I thought I'd read some results from a year ago that suggested that, as hopeful as the idea was, in practice, when you look at it more in depth, this approach to carbon sequestration won't work practically. But I can't remember where I was reading that, so I don't want to promote rumors, but I think I'd read some pretty skeptical, pretty hard evidence skepticism about that as an approach to carbon sequestration.
I see. Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
But there is a second piece, which is sort of more about the carbon sequestration aspect of this. And there's just a few facts about these fungal networks that I wanted to share. Oh, let me put the link in the chat.
I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I hope my memory is not serving me appropriately.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see. But it said here that fungi are largely invisible ecosystem engineers. Most live as branching, fusing networks of tubular cells known as mycelium. Globally, the total length of fungal mycelium in the top 10 centimeters of soil is more than 450 quadrillion kilometers, about half the width of our galaxy. So that's pretty insane to imagine. These symbiotic networks comprise an ancient life support system that easily qualifies as one of the wonders of the living world. So it's just so cool that people are starting to, you're starting to see these stories in the mainstream news about just how precious and complex and important these natural treasures are. It also talks about the degradation of soil and how important it is for us to preserve these amazing areas because they enrich the soil, and without any good soil, we'll all die for sure if a few other things don't happen first. Talks about the fact that 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide are sequestered within these networks each year, a quantity roughly equivalent to the amount of carbon emitted annually by the US. So basically, mushrooms are able to absorb our annual footprint, which is, I guess it's speculation, I mean, I think it's probably pretty hard to measure that stuff exactly, but even if it comes close, that's insane. Yeah. So I'm just learning a lot about mushrooms these days. And so I thought, Greg, you would be just fascinated to know that this is going mainstream mushroom.
Well, it's awesome to see, obviously Paul Stamets has been touting the virtues of the mycelial world for a long time. So I think he has dozens and dozens of patents in this area. So I think, he seems to be pretty hopeful that there's a lot we can use the mushrooms for as a part of our response to climate change.
I've also been noticing in the press a lot more data about the psychological medical benefits of mushrooms as well. They're starting to kind of become more mainstreamed that way. In fact, there's talk of legalizing them here in Canada with our cannabis.
Oh, you're talking about psilocybin mushrooms, the psychoactive ones.
The psychoactive ones,
Yeah. Johns Hopkins has been really spearheading a lot of great research into the use of psilocybin and other psychoactives for the treatment of a wide range of diseases, psychological, PTSD and other things. So yeah.
Yeah, and I just think about the history of humans on this planet and our relationship with that, how long standing it has been. We don't really think about that in our society right now, but I think that we've had a long relationship with the psychoactive properties of mushrooms.
Oh yeah, for sure. We also have, throughout the world, there's been a kind of shaman culture which keeps people from getting too far into the weeds with that stuff. Which, and having lost that culture, I think it is easy for people to lose sight of, how to use it in a way that's going to maximize benefit. I mean, the fortunate thing is that it seems very, very difficult, if not impossible, to overdose on the psilocybin or LSD, and they are non-addictive, which is probably why the pharmaceutical companies have been so uninterested in them.
Right.
People who use them even for recreational purposes, they have a very, very pronounced tendency to stop using them over time. Yes, it's a really interesting world for sure. And I know that in Silicon Valley, there's a trend for microdosing. So I know a lot of hackers and developers and other people in the technical field have taken up microdosing as a way to stay creative and to access more intuition.
Yeah, I have a nephew who does that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he's talked about it. I don't really know, like, do people microdose it on a regular basis, or is it something that's like, what kind of a kind of schedule do they?
There are different protocols. So I think Stamets recommends. Yeah, I mean, you can go check this out, right? Because Paul Stamets was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he said what his protocol is. But I think it's like 2 days on, 1 day off.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Yeah. I think that's it. Different practitioners recommend different protocols. Stamets interestingly recommends taking it with niacin, which does a lot for opening up the capillaries. So with that opening up, you get better delivery of the psychoactives. So that's a part of his protocol that's fascinating. And then if you look at the relationship of niacin to NMN, there's some interesting connections there. So yeah, it's fascinating. But definitely, if you're interested in this, Nora, I don't know if you've seen it, but that movie, Fantastic Fungi, is a visual.
I have
treat.
not seen it.
Oh goodness, it's really, really worth watching. Yeah, it's fantastically beautiful, and it's just a treasure trove of information. Stamets is featured quite heavily in the film.
Yeah, I was late to the party, but I discovered it a couple months ago, and yeah, I put it in the chat there, Nora. It is awesome, really great.
Yeah,
amazing. Well, I'll be sure to watch it.
and the podcasts with Stamets on Rogan's program are also quite interesting.
I'm not that fond of Joe Rogan actually, but I'm sure it's a good
Yeah.
conversation.
I'm not a big fan of Rogan himself, but he often has very interesting guests.
That's true. No one can deny that. That's why Spotify paid him $100 million.
Yeah.
Kind of has this kind of style that I think is kind of keeps you compelled for hours. But apparently also too, Daniel Schmachtenberger and what's his name, Tristan Harris were together being interviewed on Joe Rogan. Apparently,
that's correct. Yeah, that's right. So he gets really interesting folks on his show, and I mean, he's a fairly accomplished individual, right?
For sure. He also
a martial arts expert, and
he also screwed up COVID in the United States. He was one of the people that totally caused delusions of delusionment.
Yeah.
But that's fine. That's fine. People have the right to say what they want to say, so that's okay. I do appreciate that he gets good guests. You're right.
Coolio. But so did you have any more stories?
Yes, there are two more.
Okay.
So this one is from the Dallas Morning News, and this is about crypto mining and the grid. Just wanted to read a little bit from here because I thought it was an interesting piece of news here. Cryptocurrency miners pose the next big threat to the Texas electricity grid. So it says grid operator Electric Reliability Council of Texas will account for about 20% of the Bitcoin network globally by the end of 2022. So basically they're saying this one grid in Texas is going to, maintain or power 1/5 of the whole Bitcoin network by the end of next year, which was staggering to me. It says an army of cryptocurrency miners are heading to Texas for its cheap power and laissez-faire regulation. And they're going to send the demand here. It says soaring by as much as 5,000 megawatts over the next 2 years. The crypto migration to Texas has been building for months, but the sheer volume of power those miners will need, 2 times more than the capital city of almost 1 million people consumed in all of 2020, is only now becoming clear. The boom comes as the electrical system is already under strain from an expanding population and robust economy. Even before the new demand comes online, the state's grid has proven to be lethally unreliable. Catastrophic blackouts in February plunged millions into darkness for days and ultimately led to at least 210 deaths. I did not realize it was that many people until I read this. Proponents like Senator Ted Cruz and Governor Greg Abbott, both Republicans, say crypto miners are ultimately good for the grid since they say the miners can soak up excess clean power. I find that quote very interesting. And when needed, can voluntarily throttle back in seconds to help avert blackouts, which I'm sure they're all going to do because they love when the government tells them that they have to do something. But it raises the questions of what miners will do when the state's electricity demand inevitably outstrips supply. Will they adhere to an honor system of curtailing their power use, especially when the Bitcoin price itself is so high? Or will it mean even more pressure on an overwhelmed grid? So I think this is going to be an interesting space to watch, is how Texas deals with this. I don't know why those congressmen said that there's going to be extra power to soak up in the grid. I don't know if Texas has a surplus of clean power flowing through the grid. I don't know what the deal with that is. That seemed like a strange comment to me.
Well, I guess the idea there is that one of the problems with renewables, wind and solar, is that it's intermittent. Sometimes you don't have enough, sometimes you have too much. So I guess it's those moments when you have too much that they could somehow set it so that.
I mean, I think they were more trying to comment on the fact that they find green energy to be wasteful, or like they think we already have too much of it, but anyway, whatever. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting place to watch because it just seems like, I mean, I understand the regulations are possibly in crypto miners' favor. I'm not a crypto miner myself, so I don't really know what regulations exactly are causing people to go to Texas. Maybe some other people on the call know. But given that the grid catastrophically collapsed last year, which the article mentions, and Bitcoin, I don't know what else they're mining. I assume it's mostly Bitcoin. Uses a lot of energy. I find it a very poor choice to relocate to. So maybe there's a potential acceleration for green energy in Texas, or maybe there's a potential acceleration for strengthening the grid. But Texas is on its own system. I think there's a grid in the east of the United States and the west, and Texas is on its own, famously. And so I think that this is going to cause some crunching. So I'm curious about what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, they mentioned the renewable stuff, but I would be very interested to know what percentage of the electricity that goes into this mining is renewable or not. I don't think Texas is known for its massive amount of renewable energy. Maybe I'm wrong. So I'm going to guess that there's a lot
No,
of.
I think you're right. I don't think Texas has huge opportunity for solar, but I don't know if they're quite using it. It's kind of the oil state. So, but I'm hoping that if all the miners put a bunch of pressure on the grid, it'll maybe inspire some of the legislators there to strengthen the grid, which would be good for everyone,
Yeah,
if they want people to do the Bitcoin mining there so bad, then they should support that. You know what I mean? Not cause a bunch of outages to people who don't even know what Bitcoin is.
yeah. So sometimes I think you have to lean into the awful trend. I don't know what to describe it. In Tai Chi, if your opponent is going in a particularly bad direction, sometimes you have to, encourage them to go in that direction, and let the weight of their mistake carry them to a point of recognition of their mistake. I don't know. Like sometimes you can't speak reason. You have to just let consequences speak for themselves.
Sure, like not stopping a crisis if it's in the natural order or something.
So something like that. Yes,
sure.
Something like that. I don't know. Texas seems to be really blundering. The recent abortion laws were another example where it was like, wow.
Oh yes, I love being called a potential host body. That makes me feel good. I think that's great to be referred to as a host and have a bounty on my head. That is so refreshing.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know what they're thinking over there.
So I think Texas has become ruled by aliens, right? So there are lizard people running Texas. So yeah, I don't know how I think that the biggest thing is trying to get people to understand the bottom line, right? So we have to make the economic proposition for the alternatives so astoundingly better that they go, oh yeah, I'd rather do that, because the that's where the dollars are. And so I think, with really scalable networks, the first thing we have to do is we have to create demand, and we have to create realistic demand. Demand where the network services have real utility in society, whether that means um, doing self-sovereign data so people can manage their own data without having to go to any one particular cloud provider. They don't have to go to they don't have to have their data sequestered behind the firewall of a private company, to smart grid management, reconfigurable grid management. So those are like real valuable services, not just trying to emulate a kind of digital gold. And I think that once people begin to understand the actual value to their lives of those kinds of services, then the demand for the staking tokens in those networks will naturally cause the price to surge, and then the speculators will go, oh, wait, what's this? You can have these high prices, and you can have one 200 millionth of the energy outpour. Okay, I'm in.
It's more cost effective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we were just talking about this in the communications working group this week about how we still haven't figured out how to not make people, but I guess just align the values around crypto. But I think I agree with you, Greg, that people are going to see the change happen automatically, and then they're going to respond to that.
I think that the speculators are too far gone. They seem to be in this kind of weird dwarf-like gold lust, and like as in the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, you don't want to get between the dwarf and his gold when when he's in that state. It's gonna take a dragon and a war
sure.
to
Yeah, it does seem very juvenile to me. I mean, like incredibly sophisticated investors and all these people are like, changing their Twitter pictures to have the lasers in their eyes. I'm like, okay, fine.
Very hard to read. I would say that I think we are still in the era where most people think that cryptocurrency equals blockchain, as if they are like the same thing. And people have, we're still in that period of time where people don't understand all of the potential that blockchain can provide outside of just.
Yeah, that's actually so frustrating to me. I'm so glad you brought it up, because like I see on YouTube and all these places people comment and they're like, in 10 years crypto is going to take over the world or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I think blockchain will take over. I'm not sure if, like, when they say crypto, I think they mean like, the speculation market. And it's like, I don't know if that's going to take over, but definitely blockchain will be everywhere. I know that there's some inextricably linked, connection to the two, because, sometimes you need, a token or whatever to be associated with your project or whatever. But yeah, I think there is a distinction there, and I'm sure Greg understands it perfectly. As usual.
Well, I don't think anyone understands it perfectly, but like in the case of RChain, it's very, very straightforward. The token is what prevents attacks on the network. Like, imagine if we just put up on the wild and woolly internet a bunch of computers that were willing to process programs and store data that anyone in the world could access, right? So they just They submit their programs to this network of computers and they just run them. Now, if we did that and there wasn't any sort of protection, then what would happen? Well, a bunch of people would try to store all their data up there. And there would be, suddenly you'd use up all the storage capacity of the network immediately. And other people would try to run these gigantic programs, or potentially, bad actors would just say, "Oh, let's have some fun," and they write a non-terminating program, or a program that takes up infinite amounts of space, and it would eat up the capacity of the network for everybody, right? So if you want the network to not be taken down by whether it's malicious denial of service attacks, or just people not being conscious about the use of resources, what you do is you introduce a token so that you, in order to get a certain amount of computation of your program executed, you have to spend that token. In order to store a certain amount of your data on the network, you have to provide some of that token. And that way, you can't store infinitely because there aren't infinite tokens. You can't have infinitely running programs because there aren't infinite tokens to supply. And so basically the token is a security measure. And guess what? Google and Amazon and The Guardian and every other internet service has been using this approach for 20 years. The internet facing side of the Google APIs require a token, not a crypto token, but a token nonetheless. So you walk up to another one of their websites and you ask for an allocation of a certain number of tokens, and then your web application uses those tokens to access the Google services. This has been a practice for a very, very long time as a way to control denial of service attacks. And so the only thing that the crypto, the blockchain technology does, at least in the case of RChain, is to link that to the consensus algorithm, so that there's this kind of nice little ecosystem, this closed system, so that the denial of service attack and the security and the token are fit together in that particular way. But if you think about it, like the analogy is, probably someone on this call has handed out their Netflix password to a friend, so they could watch movies, on a weekend or something, or when they're sick or whatever. And then they have to worry, it's like, they either have to go change their password or worry, is my friend going to abuse this privilege, blah, blah, blah. But imagine if instead of doing that, you could hand your friend a token for one-time use of Netflix, or 10 tokens for 10 uses of Netflix, right? So
Yeah.
essentially that's what the staking tokens do, is they provide that kind of sort of tokenized or amortized security.
It's like more assurance.
Yeah.
I feel like you have more assurance, confidence.
Well, I mean, literally, it's just like, you've broken up the access in, it's like an arcade machine, right? So if you walk into one of those old digital arcades where you could play computer games, so you would buy a stack of tokens and you'd put the tokens in the machine and you could play a game.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
And you couldn't hog the machine because you'd run out of tokens.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And so that's very easy to understand, and it's a practice that the internet has already been doing for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do have one more story to share, but now we only have like 15 minutes left. So I just wanted to make sure there's nothing either of you wanted to share as well. That's might be more important.
No, go for it.
Okay, great. This is an inspiring story. I know that some people wanted me to bring more feel-good content to this presentation, and so I'm trying to do that to pepper in some positivity. And this is from CNBC, and it talks about Ithaca, New York, becoming the first U.S. city to begin 100% decarbonization of buildings. So this is a very interesting project, and it says Ithaca's buildings equate to about 40% of its carbon footprint. And they're also working on decarbonizing their entire vehicle fleet. But basically there was a unanimous vote last week, the city council did, to approve full decarbonization of its buildings. So I think this is sort of an exciting sort of mini story about how people can just start working on getting things done. It's the first US city to begin operation on a 100% decarbonization plan. Obviously it won't be the last, because eventually everyone will have to do this. But the mayor of Ithaca said, quote, "On decarbonization and frankly just about every issue, no one is coming to save us. Whether on climate or infrastructure, we have more determination. We will have to save ourselves. This is the biggest step we've taken towards decarbonization, and maybe the biggest step any city has taken." And I really like that attitude, that just like, okay, we're here to do it. We are elected officials. Like, what's holding us back? I'm sure we'll run into some, problems along the way, but like, let's just aim for it and let's do it. I think that if more people in more places adopted this idea of, no one is coming to save us, in an alternative universe, that could be a great slogan for RChain. No one is coming to save you. That's a little dark, but I just feel that that would be a very strong statement for people to make, because it really just allows people to make their own solutions. And I think that's what we need right now, is not for people to wait, for permission to do this, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And this was the point that I've been trying to make about decentralization, is that what we're going to see is this kind of trend where people go, nobody's going to come and save me. I've got to take care of me and my own. And so if you get a bunch of taking care of me and my own efforts coordinated, so that, everybody is aligning their interests together, then you can build from the bottom up a much larger effort that will begin to have the kind of scope and impact that is realistic. What we've seen is that, the Paris Accords are effectively top down, and top down has not worked. And even with COVID, what we've seen is that without the consent at the bottom up, the top down measures also they run aground, because you have to get the bottom up engagement and support, and so this is why RChain has been focused on building a decentralized technology that allows for more and more coordination kind of at the grassroots level, so that you can, in a compositional fashion, you can assemble larger and larger blocks of coordinating groups. So that's the idea. So I think this is very much in alignment with what RChain's been trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll just read just a couple more little pieces just so people can understand. Ithaca's plan will cover electrification projects for 1,000 residential buildings and 600 commercial buildings in the first phase of a total 6,000 building inventory. for Ithaca buildings are the first target for several reasons. 40% of its buildings were constructed before 1940, and buildings represent 40% of its carbon emissions profile. The city already receives 80% of its power supply from hydroelectric and nuclear power plants, whereas in other cities, transitioning the power fleet may take precedence. They also talk about the challenges of getting these buildings up to standard when they're really old versus like just having new building standards for new buildings. So that is something to consider as well. I think it's probably more expensive to not fully remodel, but to, decarbonize a building that's got a bunch of, cracks and holes and deficient insulation and so on and so forth, rather than just build a building with those things in mind. But they both have to happen. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say about this. I just think it's a very exciting time because we're starting to see people really take responsibility for their towns and their homes. And I hope we see lots more of these projects. Hopefully these projects won't even make the news because it'll be like, oh, they're decarbonizing, big deal. And only it'll be a news story if there's something, totally interesting about it. But I'm hoping that this just happens more and more and it doesn't even become a news story because it's so common. That's my hope.
Yeah, it's like kind of like what Greg was just talking about, and maybe this ties all the way back to the first topic of the day with mycelia and the fungi network, that complex network that's underneath us all, invisible to us. It makes me think about, like, Ithaca could be the first city, and it has a success story, and then other ones kind of replicate it and spread out, and that spreads to other ones, which spreads to other ones. It's kind of how the universal healthcare system started in Canada. In 1962, Kiefer Sutherland's grandfather, this guy named Tommy Douglas, who was the premier. So he was like the equivalent of a governor. So the premier of the province of Saskatchewan, introduced public health insurance, and it spread very quickly to the other provinces because it was kicking butt and it was just working really well. And so, before you know it, the entire country was covered by medical. It's still provincially based, but it's universal across Canada. So I think that's like Greg said, it's like the Paris Accord is very top down, and it's really difficult to do that. It's not really the best way, it seems.
Yeah, I think if you're going to do top down, then you have to do that in tandem with several concerted bottom up grassroots kinds of things. So that's when things are successful. If you're tapping into a kind of a movement, then the top down can add this extra level of coordination. But if you're not, then we see what happens, right? If you try to go top down and you run afoul of some significant block of citizens or organizational participants, then the effort flounders and often fails.
Yeah, like if a top-down responds to a community, then it can work. But if a top-down dictates to a community, then it's less likely to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because the community has the energy, the community brings the actual vitality to the issue, whatever it is, and you can't make someone care about something. But if a lot of people together really do care about it themselves, then, that higher infrastructure can provide support to that purpose.
Yeah. So for example, in the recent 2020 US presidential election, there was so much concerted bottom up And like there's so many folks who are just out there working in the community, trying to build a consensus across a wide range of political views, and it's and then when that was coupled with, you know, a lot of top down, you know, DNC style efforts, that you could get a result, and even then it was just barely enough to carry the day for the, you know, the new administration. But that's you know, that's a recent example, I think, with the climate change. You know, my sense now is just that people, it's what we were talking about with the Tai Chi in Texas, right? Just unfortunately, you just gotta let people make their mistakes, and then nature is going to force them to see that they can't live that way anymore.
It's another good bet. Tai Chi in Texas.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, are there any final comments or anything that anyone wishes to announce?
Well, there was this lecture series that Steve Ross Talbot has been talking about throughout the week, and I have a feeling he probably, the next time he'll be on this call, he might want to talk more about it. So I'll just kind of introduce the lecture. It's from the BBC, and it's about AI and why people should be scared. And it's Professor Stuart Russell, founder of, and I love the name of this organization, the Center for Human Compatible Artificial Intelligence. So it's him kind of, you know, talking about, you know, what he knows about AI, and you know, some of the things we need to do in order to ensure that AI is something where it's ours, not, you know, one or two or three major companies that own our data.
Yeah. It would be great if that, I mean, the you know, this is why I think we have to have conversations with people like Mark Solms, because it's not just about the data, it's also that it's so easy, relatively speaking, to build AI that is not oriented towards the even towards life on Earth, right? You can build AI that has like zero orientation to the continuance of life on Earth, and you could, you know, it would be just like the tug of war between the methanogens and the oxygen breathers, you know, whatever it was a couple billion years ago. Like the oxygen breathers didn't really care about the methanogens, right? There wasn't even a thought process. There was no sense of struggle and deliberation and angst. It was just like, well, this is just how we're organized. And then the planet's atmosphere changed and the methanogens disappeared. And the same thing could happen with AI. If you organize AI in a way that its drives and urges and values are, not aligned with the existing ecosystem, then it could replicate at a speed and pace that we haven't seen things replicate in a long time, and completely overrun the planet. AI is very dangerous. You know, we're definitely playing with fire, and how to get a handle on it is a really interesting puzzle. I still think as with the genetically modified organisms, look, there's Mars. Mars doesn't have an atmosphere. Mars doesn't have, a way to grow food. So go there. Do all your cool biotech GMO experiments up there, and you could also do the AI up there. Doing it here on planet Earth is very, very dangerous. But maybe we take Elon Musk's attitude and just try to set up a Neuralink so that we're not lost, so that we can participate in the sea change that's going to happen there.
Boy, it's terrifying.
On that note, we've got our staff meeting.
Yes, we do. Thank you all for a great conversation, and make sure you are following RChain on Twitter, and we'll see you next week.